All right, you guys. So here we go with lesson three, the war at home. We look at what happened in the United States during World War One and what changes really came about. Now, uh, we're gonna see changes not just in like our economy and how basically everybody was making more money and businesses were booming and all of that, but we also look at what changes were happening through politics and then just in our society as a whole. Okay. Now, we start off with how the government was going to respond to us being in this war. Now, we knew that the war wasn't just like, yeah, we're going to send soldiers over there and let them handle this and that's that. We understood that it was going to take everybody, every part of the United States in order to guarantee our interests were going to be followed through. Okay. So what happens is our economy shifts from basically making stuff for people like, I don't know, clothes and food and cars and whatever to making stuff for wars. So now we're going to be producing tanks and we're going to be making MREs or military ready meals or whatever they're called, um, or clothing for troops. All right. So Congress ended up handing over to Woodrow Wilson quite a bit of power in how that was going to happen. Okay. And he institutes what's called the War Industries Board. And basically, they were the ones, he put this board together and said, okay, you guys make sure that this gets done. Get our country making things on a huge scale, standardizing products, basically saying, tell these companies they can make this, this, or this for the war, and that's it. Okay. Now, the War Industries Board, you guys can see the picture of who was on that board in the upper right hand corner. Now, the guy that they put in charge of the entire board was Bernard Baruch. He was a businessman. He's the guy that you see on the bottom right corner here. I'm not sure if my mouse will come up. No, it won't. So, um, we had the War Industries Board basically regulating who was making what and how the economy was going to get us ready for this war. Again, make sure you guys are paying attention for when I say your name, Jonathan, so that you can tell me what time did I say your name. Okay. Now, um, with the War Industries Board, um, basically telling people what to make and what to do, our economy starts booming. Okay. Um, Tori, profits went up for everyday people like you and me went up 20%. Okay, that was their wages. Uh Esther, for companies, their profits just skyrocketed. If their employees were getting 20% more, could you imagine how much the companies were making? It was just crazy. Um and across the country you see that uh there are unions popping up all over, basically like clubs that people could join to make sure that they're not being abused as workers because work hours were being extended, children were able like were working in places, and so across the country you'd have over 6,000 people or 6,000 different strikes, um, basically calling for better work conditions. Okay, and this is where President Woodrow Wilson created the National War Labor Board, and James, they had a very like no nonsense approach to all of this. The National War Labor Board said you can do one of two things. You can either shut up and get to work or grab a gun and go fight for us overseas. Okay. So the focus really was solely on what can we do to get this country war ready. All right. Now, Callista, a couple other agencies were developed. The Railroad Administration really had a sole purpose of overseeing. It basically nationalized the railroads, so the federal government basically had say over how railroads were run. And Vinny, the Fuel Administration, um, basically put restrictions on like how much gasoline or coal or diesel or oil that could be or could be used. Okay, now Victoria, uh, the rest of the country kind of got on board with this, and they understood that they needed to conserve or cut back on certain things. Okay. Uh, but when we looked at actually how were we gonna uh how was the government, what were the big issues that they were looking to tackle, and it really was going back to money and going back to people's uh willingness for this war. Okay. Now, Joe, they had two problems. Could we get money, and how are we going to convince American people that this war is, we have to get behind it. Okay. So the US spends $35.5 billion on the war effort. And where did they get this money? Well, they raised taxes quite a bit. And they also did something. They actually sold things that were called war bonds. Okay. It was just like basically a sheet of paper. Alton, that they would sell to somebody like you or me, maybe they for like $50, and it said on it that when the war's over, we'll give you $60. So it was basically you were investing in the war, and after we won, you would get paid a little bit more because of it. All right. The next thing that they did, Ray, was uh, they needed to convince people that this war was good. So they instituted what's called propaganda. Okay, propaganda is literally just media um, that is biased to influence people. Okay, so the idea was, let's put posters and radio ads and magazine articles out there that are convincing people that the war is good. Okay, now Alton, Tyrese, and Ray, um, they put a guy by the name of George Creel uh, as the head honcho for what's called the Committee on Public Information. Now, the Committee on Public Information basically called on artists to create works of art that made the war look good to the American people. Okay, and we see that poster to the right-hand side where it says, "Wake up, America! Civilization calls every man, woman, and child." And there you see Lady Liberty falling asleep, and it was basically symbolic of saying, hey, we need to wake ourselves up because we got a fire in the background, and if we don't wake up soon and do something, who knows how soon that could get to our door. Okay. So Creel gets a lot of people to produce these artworks promoting the war. And he also ended up getting like thousands and thousands of volunteers to literally go around and give speeches on why this war is such an important thing for America. Okay. I want to say it was like 70, I don't know, 40 to 80,000 people to go give these speeches. I think it was 75,000. Maybe you guys can check me on that one. But also, you looked at how the war was affecting people, actual people, okay? And yeah, the government was issuing propaganda that was all about like patriotism and stuff. But incidentally, it ended up propelling or perpetuating the notion of hatred to certain ethnic groups. And even like if somebody was against the war, this propaganda was like basically creating hate on them. Okay. So what happened sadly was, if people were originally, if they immigrated from Austria, Hungary, or Germany, and they lived here in the United States and maybe they were citizens, they were really, really discriminated against or even attacked. They would focus literally attacking these groups of people. Okay. You looked at how German culture was influenced during World War One, and they would try to basically not play any of their music. If somebody spoke German, that was going to be done away with, because hello, if Germans are being attacked in the United States and they're just American citizens with German heritage, they're not going to want to speak their mother tongue because they know that it might get them punched in the face, honestly. Okay, and then same went for literature or books and things like that. All right. Legally, you had the Espionage and Sedition Acts, and this was pretty darn intrusive on American rights, you guys. People could be fined or even put in jail if they spoke out about the government and said that they didn't believe in the war, or they thought it was wrong that we were fighting it. And eventually, we did see that this was a violation of your First Amendment right of freedom of speech, you guys, because in this country, freedom of speech says that you cannot get punished for disagreeing with something like why a country is going to war. Okay. And so the Espionage and Sedition Acts was unconstitutional. All right. You also look at what other social changes were happening. And especially we look at minorities and African Americans. We saw what was called the Great Migration, where the originally, we look at the South during the Civil War, and there was a huge black population down there. Well, African Americans ended up migrating north to places like you see on the map here, trying to get away from racial discrimination. And also, you guys, there were tons of jobs up there. We were producing stuff on a huge scale for this war, and we already know that up in the north there were a lot of industries up there. And so yeah, you could get a better chance at a good paying job up there as opposed to down south, where again it was still largely agricultural. um, the unfortunate thing was they still faced a lot of discrimination when they moved up north. Okay. Many African Americans did support the war. They thought that maybe this might grant them even more rights if they were willing to fight for the United States. And at the same time, because of all these injustices, people were urging for racial equality and justice, really. Okay. Some thought victims of racism should not support the government because they viewed that it was racist. So there was some division there as well. Um, but again, we look at different groups or different populations or demographics in the United States. And women, ladies, this is where we're going to see you really take a huge leap forward in terms of the workforce. Before this time, women weren't really seen out in the working world much. And now that all these men are gone, yeah, women jump into factories and they start doing all of this work that I guess guys at the time didn't think women could do. You had those that were doing volunteer work, those that were helping out in different places. But you did, again, not everybody was in favor of the war, and you did have a group of women that wanted the war to end, and they started a party called the Women's Peace Party, where that was their focus, was let's end this war and let's just bring our boys home and be in a time of peace. Okay. But throughout all of this, what it did was it really, the women stepping up the way that they did helped push forward what's going to become the 19th Amendment. And if anybody knows what the 19th Amendment is, I'd be impressed. But the 19th Amendment was allowed women's right to vote, or women's suffrage. Okay, so if it wasn't for the help that they provided during World War I, who knows how long it would have taken before the 19th Amendment would get passed. Okay. Now, finishing up, you guys, here at home and across the world, we had an epidemic happening. Okay. Now, we know that we're in the midst of an epidemic right now. But almost 100 years ago, there was a flu epidemic, and over 30 million people had died. That picture there, you can see the overcrowding of the victims that had, or the people that were suffering from this flu virus. Again, 30 million people. To put it into perspective for you guys, I'm looking right now online. Worldwide, the coronavirus epidemic, there are 22,000 deaths. Okay, compared to 30 million worldwide. So this did have an effect on the world. Coming to the end of World War I, and then we faced this huge flu virus, this epidemic, was very devastating. Very, very devastating. And it's really ironic that we're talking about that right now. during the midst of this coronavirus epidemic. But we'll get started on section 4 in the next video, talking about peace. We'll see you guys then.